once you print out the template, you are going to cut this out with paper scissors. It's really important that you know the difference between your paper scissors and fabric cutting scissors. Once you have that cut out, you are going to create 2 pieces. I like to fold my fabric in half so that I only have to cut 1 time. So I have 2 pieces of the large template size, and I have 2 pieces of the small fabric size. So you want to pin the fabric because pinning fabric makes the fabric not move when you're ready to sew. So just a reminder, because we've done this process before, you push the pin in and then pop it up. And there's no right or wrong when it comes to pinning for the amount of pins that you need to use. Just determine if your fabric is secure. So I'm going to pop one down here. I like to space mine out a bit, and then I'll pop another pin on the end. I have paper cutting scissors, not fabric cutting scissors, and I cut a long thin rectangle off of that. Now once I have that long thin rectangle, that will make a couple pieces of threading paper. So I'm going to pick up one of my pieces and create my hot dog bun. It should be folded the long way so it looks like a bun. Then the hot dog is my piece of yarn or thread. I'm going to lay it inside. Remember, the hot dog should not be poking out of the bun. Then I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to use the corner, wiggle that corner in there, and push it through. Now sometimes you will have to pinch the corner a little bit and help it through. You're going to pull the thread and take the hot dog bun off. Next, I want to tie the knot. So remember, we do a double thread because it's easier for your thread to stay in the eye of your needle and less frustrating. So I make sure that my thread is taut, and I make sure the needle's in the middle, and I get to the end of my thread or yarn. I don't know what that little piece is in there. So I make sure both pieces are together and I make a loop. Remember, if I ever go too fast, you can always pause the video and catch up or re-watch it as many times as you need. Now once I make the loop, I'm going to take the feet, that's what I call the end of the thread, and I tuck the feet underneath into the loop. Now I don't just pull willy-nilly, I kind of push it as close to the end of my thread as I possibly can without, releasing the knot, and I pull it tight. Okay guys, so now that I have my needle threaded and my thread knotted, I am going to start on the curved section of my fabric. Remember that it should be pinned and the right side should be together. Now most of you are going to immediately remember doing the running stitch, but the running stitch is not the best stitch to make sure that this is secure and closed. So we're going to use the back stitch. I'm going to start from underneath. Remember, we always start from underneath, and I am going to pull my needle through to the knot. Okay, remember, it's always a good idea to check to make sure you're at the knot and you don't have something like this going on. That's just a waste of thread. Okay, then I'm going to skip a little bit of space. It shouldn't be wider than your pinky nail, and I'm going to pull that through. Now first, when you're looking at this, you're probably saying, hey lady, that looks like the running stitch. The back stitch at first looks like the running stitch. Okay, the first stitch looks like the running stitch. Then I'm going to come from underneath, skip a space, and pull through. I like to give it a little check to make sure I don't have extra thread there. Then this is why it's called the back stitch. I go back to where I started. Okay, so the main difference between the running stitch and the back stitch is that there is no space in between the stitches, which makes it a very secure stitch. Watch again. I skip forward. Remember, you don't want to skip too big of a space. Then I go back to where I started. So here you can see that I have gone the entire length of the curved part of my pattern with the back stitch. So when I was done, I simply tied a knot where I left off, and now I'm going to do the exact same process with my smaller pieces. I have finished the back stitch on my large 2 pieces, and I have finished the back stitch on my smaller 2 pieces. So I'm going to take the pins out that were holding the fabric together so they didn't move, and I am going to open the large piece first. Okay, so because I used the back stitch, you can see that there are no holes. I mean, you can see where my stitching is a little bit, but it's a nice secure stitch. So now that I have this open to the correct side, I'm going to open my smaller piece to the correct side, and I'm going to put correct sides together. So where you stitched is called the seam. So I am lining up the seam with my smaller piece to the seam of my larger piece. Now we are going to sew these 2 pieces together, but remember, you don't sew unless you have things pinned. Pinning keeps things in place. So I'm going to take one of my pins, I push all the way through both the large piece and the small piece, and then I pop it back in place. So I have one at the seam. Then you can see the curve. This curve is going to go around your cheek area. I'm going to pop a pin there so it doesn't move while I'm trying to sew. Push it all the way through both layers of fabric and pop it back through. So just wanted to show you how I'm starting my back stitch. Remember, you don't want to be right on the edge. You want to go a little bit down from the edge of your mask. And I pull to the knot. Then I'm going to do a regular stitch, no wider than my pinky nail. There it is. Then I skip up a space. And I go back to where I started. Okay, so I just wanted to review how we are supposed to do a normal knot. I noticed that I'm starting to get to the end of my thread, and I want to make a knot and re-thread my needle. So I'm going to flip over my mask to the back side where I've been doing my back stitch, and I'm going to make a loop. Remember, wherever you make that loop, that's where the knot's going to be. So you don't want your loop way out here. You want it as close to the fabric as you can make it. Then I'm going to take my needle, put it underneath the loop, and remember, don't just pull any old kind of way. I try to push it as close to my fabric as I possibly can. Then I'll give it a little snip, and I will re-thread my needle so that I can stitch all the way down to the end. Okay, so I wanted to show you my progress. So I have done the back stitch all the way up to the seam of my mask, and I have stitched the back stitch all the way down until the smaller piece of my pattern fabric has ended. Now that I have that stitched in place, I'm going to pull out my pins because I don't need them to keep the fabric in place. My stitching will keep it in place. And then I'm going to turn it around to the lower part of my mat. So now that I have gone with the back stitch all the way around, I have now gone to the opposite side, the bottom of the mask. You want to start pinning the seam first. So I lined up the 2 seams of my 2 pieces of fabric. Then I gave 1 pin to this side, 1 pin to this side, and then I'll be doing my back stitch. So now you can see that I have backstitched the length of the smaller piece of fabric all the way to the end. Now that I have that backstitch in place, I can take my pins out, and then I'm going to turn my mask right side out. So I'm going to open up these side pockets that I have not stitched, and I'm going to push the fabric through. So now I'm going to turn my fabric on the side where the smaller piece is in, and I am going to fold. So I wanted you to see how I pinned the edge. I folded it right up to where the smaller piece of fabric ends. Now that I have both sides of my mask pinned in place, I'm going to again do the back stitch to secure the edge. Okay, so I have done the back stitch for both sides of my mask, here and here, and of course I tied a knot. This is what the opposite side looks like. And now I'm going to take out all of my pins because I don't need them anymore. So now the mask is ready to be strung with our elastic. The elastic is going to go in this little pocket that we've created for ourselves. I'll show you how that's going to work. So now we're going to string the shoelace or elastic, or you could even use a strip of fabric that will allow you to tie the mask to your face. So I like to fold the tip of my piece like this. Then I'm going to get a safety pin, and I am going to put the safety pin on the end. Notice I stuck it through both pieces of my shoestring here. Then I'm going to take the end of the pin, insert it, and because I have a pin, I can feel the hardness of the metal, which helps me to scoot it through the little pouch that we created for ourselves. So this is what I've done so far. This is where my tail, remember I told you to leave a long tail, I threaded my shoelace through the pocket there, and then I looped around to the other side, threaded through that way, and now I have quite a bit of extra left on the ends. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to put that in place. Hey guys, so the mask, the part that has this kind of curve, that's the part that fits over your nose. Okay, so it's going to fit nice and snug on the sides. But before I even do that, I'm going to take my bottom strap that I have there, and I'm going to put that over my head. Okay, then I can pull on the sides to tighten this up.